Every so often, the government is plunged into chaos by a little thing called the debt limit.
Well, the single greatest threat to the United States of America.
The government has announced that the U.S. has reached the debt ceiling.
Washington now in the battle brewing in Congress over the debt ceiling.
Yellen said the Treasury will take what she called extraordinary measures to shift funds around and prevent a national default.
First things first, what is the debt limit? The debt limit, also called the debt ceiling, you can use them interchangeably, is basically an arbitrary limit on how much money the U.S. Treasury can borrow to pay its bills. Which raises the question, how did this come about? To find out, we have to jump all the way back to the early 20th century. Before this point, Congress would have to pass individual bills authorizing each specific debt action by the Treasury. Extremely tedious. In 1917, during the First World War, the country was in need of money, so the government started selling Liberty bonds to raise money for the war effort. Now, Congress didn't want to have to deal with all the Treasury's problems, so they just said, hey guys, you can do your thing how you want, just don't borrow over this amount of money. This was passed into law by the Second Liberty Bond Act of 1917, a suitably dull name for certain, although not the dullest one I've ever seen. Now the Treasury could borrow money and issue bonds without specific congressional approval, and Congress could get back to being Congress, and everyone was happy. The situation continued along pretty well for a long while, with Congress raising the debt ceiling when necessary, and, except for a brief issue in 1953, there wasn't really a whole lot of drama over the debt ceiling. It was just one of Congress's jobs, and they generally didn't make a big fuss about it. This was actually codified by the so-called Gephardt Rule in 1979 that basically said that whenever Congress votes for appropriations, or a budget, the debt limit is just automatically raised to match. This rule was eventually removed. But wait, what? Why are we raising the debt limit anyway? Shouldn't we get the national debt under control? This is the question that consistently gets raised. Why is the president spending all this money and breaking the debt limit? Well, let's go through that argument one step at a time and deconstruct it a bit. First of all, the president does not set the budget. That is the job of Congress. They can propose a budget, but Congress can completely ignore it, modify it whatever they want. Every year, Congress mandates a certain amount of spending and gives the executive branch a certain amount of money raised from taxes and stuff, but mostly taxes. It doesn't matter where it comes from anyway. What matters is that the amount of money they give has been, for the last 20 years, the time since we last had a balanced budget, less than the amount of money they require by law. The president can't refuse to spend the money. It is legally required. So the Treasury is forced to borrow money to make up the difference. The second part of this is understanding what the debt ceiling actually is. It isn't so much a limit on how much money can be borrowed, it's a limit on how much debt gets paid. To put it simpler, imagine you want to buy a new Tesla, because you're cool like that, for $90,000. You only have $80,000 in cash, so you pay that, and take out a loan to cover the difference. Let's say then you look at your bank account the next week and you say, oh, I've barely got any money left. How could this have happened? And then, furious at whoever spent all of your money when you weren't looking, refuse to pay back the loan you took out. That's essentially what the periodical debt ceiling crises are. Congress refusing to pay its bills while pretending to be the victim of the president's recklessness. In the process of this, an opposition Congress can basically hold the president hostage, demanding policy concessions in a highly dangerous game of chicken, where both sides hold out until the so-called X date, the date in which the Treasury's extraordinary measures are exhausted and they are no longer able to pay its bills, and the US defaults on its debts. What would happen then? Nobody really knows, because it has never happened, although we also have never had a president be impeached twice and cite an insurrection over claims of a false election, and then be criminally indicted after leaving office, so who knows? Pretty much all economists agree, though, that that would be, what's the technical term? Ah, yes, a very bad thing. History has shown that when countries go bankrupt, things go bad. History has shown that when countries go bankrupt, things spiral downward very fast. The one time the US came close to defaulting was enough to shake global markets and lead to the US government's credit rating being downgraded, making it harder for it to borrow money. And that was just the threat of a default. According to the US Treasury Department, quote, that, a default, would precipitate another financial crisis and threaten the jobs and savings of everyday Americans, putting the United States right back in a deep economic hole, unquote. So, those who resist raising the debt limit for economic reasons are hypocrites. But it extends further. The same representatives that occasionally cause a standoff when an opposite party president is in office are more than happy to raise the debt limit for their own party. Since 1960, Congress has acted 78 separate times to raise, or at least suspend, the debt limit. 29 times under Democratic presidents, and 49 under Republican presidents. Does the US need to do something about the national debt? Well, maybe, or honestly, maybe not. Economists don't really agree. But what everyone should agree on is that this is not the proper way to go about addressing this. We should be having a discussion about the debt, but we shouldn't be holding the economy hostage in order to score cheap political points. So, what happens now? Well, other than Congress going through the normal process, which they should, of passing a law to raise or suspend the debt limit, there are a few more interesting options. There are some people who argue that Section 4 of the 14th Amendment, which says in part that, quote, the validity of the public debt of the United States shall not be questioned, unquote, makes a default unconstitutional, and that the Treasury should just ignore the debt limit and keep paying its bills. But this could create a dangerous crisis and would almost certainly end up before the Supreme Court. The thing to remember about money is that it only has value if we believe it does, whether it's backed by gold, silver, or mayonnaise. Any event that even just shakes faith in the system can lead to a downward spiral, whatever the end result is. Some representatives have proposed a law that would allow the president to raise the debt limit however they want, unless Congress overrides it with a 2/3 vote. Other representatives have also raised the idea of a discharge petition, a complex congressional process that allows members to force a vote on an issue regardless of what the Speaker, currently Kevin McCarthy, wants. Whatever happens, though, I'll still be here making videos about it, so please consider liking, commenting, subscribing, clicking the bell, all that fun YouTube stuff, and I will see you in the next crisis.